dey talk, you dey talk, you dey talk, you dey talk, you dey talk, whoa. You dey yam, you dey yam, you dey yam, you dey yam, you dey yam. You say you dey help somebody, you dey talk. You say you
So my title is Beyond Constraints, Scaling Up to 500 million Farmers. I'll get to why that title is there. So I'm going to make 4 points. The first one is meant to inspire you that reaching 500 million may not be so difficult, that there really have been significant successes in climate-smart agriculture. The second point is meant to depress you, that the targets that we actually have to reach are really significant. The third one is, once again, that there are some significant constraints to be addressed. And then lastly, I will go on to 4 principles or cornerstones that I think are needed to get beyond the constraints. So the first part is drawn from this book, and I've got a few copies here, but you can also download them off the web. There are 16 success stories from the developing and the developed world, and I'm just going to mention 4 of them. So the first one, I should ask Dennis Garrity to come up to the front and talk about it, because he's much more inspiring about this one than I could possibly be. This is Niger, one of the poorest countries in Africa, bringing back the underground forests. 5 million hectares of land restored, 200 million trees re-established. It's an amazing success. And it hits on all 3 of the pieces of climate-smart agriculture: additional grain, reducing drought impacts, and sequestering carbon. So it's one of these win-win technologies. The first one is another one from Africa on drought-tolerant maize. The Drought-Tolerant Maize for Africa program has developed 100 new varieties released across 13 countries involving 2 million smallholders. And once again, yields are up, gives resilience to drought, and like Tim said on the first day, adaptation can be mitigation. Essentially, if we intensify, it means we do not have to put as much land under agriculture, and you can save carbon through not deforesting. The third example comes from China, paying for environmental services, an amazing program from the Chinese government, paying farmers to set aside land and plant trees. In the remaining land, the yields have increased because of the land being rehabilitated, reducing erosion, and sequestering enormous amounts of carbon. And the last example comes from India on weather-based insurance, an amazing scheme of 12 million farmers and 40 different crops being insured by the National Insurance Company of India, and allowing farmers to access fertilizer and better seed because they're not in such a risky environment. It's reducing the risks and reducing pressure on land to put more land under cultivation. So these are 4 of the 16 cases, just indicating the possibilities. But major scaling up is needed. When we talked about those success stories, we're talking about millions of farmers. When we look at the problems, we're talking about billion. In terms of poverty, hunger, in terms of land degradation, 1.5 billion people living on degraded land, 7.5 billion US dollars lost to extreme weather events in 2010. And when you look to the future, we're on course for a 4-degree warmer world, which in a Southern African situation means potentially 7-degree warmer world in Southern Africa. My colleague Phil Thornton has put this together. The grey is more than 20% loss in growing season. So for Southern Africa, it would be a revolution in the farming systems to cope with that. So what should our targets be? And I think one is talking about essentially all the farmers in the world. The target has to be 500 million farmers practicing climate-smart agriculture, or 500 million with enhanced adaptive capacity to deal with more extreme weather events. What should the mitigation targets be to? We've just had a team from CSIR in South Africa and Columbia University in New York State put together some targets for developing countries in terms of what they believe is feasible. So by 2035, they think a 22% reduction in agricultural emissions relative to the business as usual scenario is possible, and agriculture as driving deforestation, reducing that impact by 46% or half. So these are quite significant targets. When I was making this presentation, I was wandering around the house at home saying, 500 million farmers, that's just too much. And my son, who's 16 years old, said, McDonald's reached 63 million customers in a day, so 500 million smallholders in the next decade should be easy. The enthusiasm of youth has to rub off on one. So I've put together some statistics from sub-Saharan Africa, and I have to say sorry to Yemi because it's not politically correct anymore. But actually, when you try and find the data on the whole of Africa, it's quite difficult because the data is compiled often for sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at food demand, this is what it looks like. If you look at grain yields per hectare, it's not looking too good. So this is the actual data. The dotted data for food demand is going into the future from 2012, all on a relative scale or percentage scale. So yields don't look like they're going to keep up. However, just like the speaker from SNV on the first day, I'm still really positive. If you look at the GDPs, this is the picture for GDP. So Africa is going through growth, and it's predicted to continue, if you look at the website, say, of Standard Chartered Bank. And a lot about what we're talking about is information and knowledge. Africa is also in the midst of a mobile phone revolution. And I think that's going to be a game changer in terms of what is possible. So for me, I think that these targets are actually feasible. What about the mitigation target? This is cereal production and nitrogen fertilizer use in the US and in China. So the amount of nitrogen put on per hectare in the first, on the left-hand side, and the amount of nitrogen that goes on per ton of grain produced. So in China, it's much more inefficient production in terms of nitrogen use per ton of food produced. If nitrogen use efficiency could be improved by only 5 percentage points in China, 1.5 billion could be saved in fertilizer costs. Amazing saving. So this makes sense from a financial perspective as well as the next piece, an environmental perspective. This is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that would result from less nitrous oxide going up in the atmosphere, which in a single country, albeit a rather large single country, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions from nitrogen management by up to 40%. So I think that these targets are feasible. But there are significant constraints to be addressed when one starts getting down to the ground level. And I'm going to give you 2 examples, just because I thought it would be nicer to give some on-the-ground examples rather than some sort of global lessons. So let's look at rice. The blue is paddy rice production. It contributes 5% of all land-based emissions. So can we do anything about it? If you look at country profiles of emissions, Vietnam, for example, 25% of all the emissions in Vietnam come from rice production. This is including all their industrial emissions. So rice is a significant crop to focus on in terms of emission reductions. And there's this amazing technology, alternate wetting and drying. You keep the ground flooded for the first 15 days and at the flowering stage, but otherwise you can let the water drop to less than 15 centimeters below the surface before you irrigate again. Here's a result from one of the trials with the conventional flooded rice production, and the alternate wetting and drying in green. And this is the amount of emissions produced. So you can get a 42% reduction in emissions by following this technology. But, and this is one of the issues that we have to tackle with climate smart agriculture, it differs by which season you did the planting. So that you can get different results in different seasons. Also differs between hilly upslopes and low-lying areas, so much less reductions in the hilly areas. So climate smart agriculture is really context specific, and we have to deal with that in order to get up to the numbers. But in general, alternate wetting and drying, you can get 30% reduction in water, you can get major greenhouse gas emissions without compromising the yield. So, if this is such a fantastic technology, why isn't it everywhere already? Because many countries are interested in saving water, for example. Well, there's issues to be dealt with. And one of the issues to be dealt with is you need much more sophisticated management of your water regimes. You're dealing with smallholder farming systems, so over large areas, people have to do it cooperatively in terms of how you deal with the water. And it's much easier just to flood and let the water stand. As we've heard from Sonia on the first day, Vietnam has taken a major step. The Prime Minister's office put in place a greenhouse gas emission reduction program. It's passed on to the Agricultural Ministry, and it's passed down to the implementation level, where they've putting in place the incentives and the systems to put things like alternate wetting and drying in place. So one can get over the constraints, I would argue. Here's the second example. This is intercropping of coffee and banana. It's from East Africa. So this is the Arabica coffee system, and this is the yields. Under monocrops or under intercrops, you almost get the same yield of coffee. And yet, if you intercrop, you can get a yield of bananas as well, which is a staple in that part of the world. Robusta coffee, same country, similar, perhaps not as dramatic. You don't get, you get slightly decreased yield of coffee, and you don't get such a big yield of the banana. So there's more competition between the two crops. If you look at a farmer's income, you can almost double your income if you intercrop. Not as much with the Robusta systems. So once again, here's a fantastic technology. It increases incomes to farmers, it enhances the food security, diversifies, which is an adaptation strategy, decreases the drought impacts because the banana plants protect the coffee plants, and you're putting more carbon in the system. Oh, goodness, fantastic. Why isn't it everywhere? So, what are the constraints? There's absolutely no intercropping information on which banana varieties to grow, what levels of fertilizer, what spacing. The extension advice is purely monocropping. There's no extension advice on intercropping. The research system is organized by commodity, not system. So there's a banana commodity, there's a banana research institute, and there's a coffee, and nobody does it together. And there's no public sector support for intercropping. Right from the colonial days, intercropping has been no-go because coffee was a major export crop, so the focus was all on coffee. So there's major institutional challenges, but I would also argue that this seems pretty easy to actually get around. There's also upfront investment costs. So if farmers were going to change from today to a different system, there would be significant upfront costs for farmers. So what do we need to go beyond the constraints? And I'm going to make just 4 points. So the first point, I think, is that we really have to take a comprehensive perspective. So often what we hear is about crop solutions. We have to think about livestock, fisheries, and forestry. It's all part of climate-smart agriculture. And we have to think way beyond our agricultural technologies into productive safety nets and how they link with farmers, insurance and how it links with farmers, And really important is to start getting the meteorological services working with the agricultural services in terms of delivering forecasts for farmers, rolled in with other ag advisories. The second one is going for the best bets. And the more fancy word would be prioritization. And a few months ago, a group of 10 from different organizations got together where we started thinking about how could you prioritize in different parts of the world. And so one of the kind of approaches that we're thinking of now is to work out the kinds of climate-smart agricultural practices that are possible in different regions of the world and looking at what they do for the different elements of climate-smart agriculture. But we don't want to leave that on the shelf, so we're trying a pilot in Colombia, which involves a whole range of things. So the first thing is preparing some generic lists for a workshop, having a workshop with the key stakeholders in the country, and this is Colombia, where we looks at the potential options, which options do people believe, and how do the stakeholders want to weigh mitigation benefits, adaptation benefits, or food security benefits. Going away, doing some analysis for that stakeholder group in terms of collecting costs and benefits of the different options, coming together with another workshop where one has a portfolio of possibilities, the best bets for different parts of the country in Colombia, and the barriers and constraints that have to be addressed, and resulting in a prioritized CSA investment portfolio, which the government of Colombia is committed to run through. The third and the fourth one comes from our investigating of these success stories. So when we look at the 16 success stories, invariably governments have played a major role in terms of making it happen. For lots of very different reasons. Tenure, ownership of trees or joint management of forest areas, payment for environmental services, reorientated research and development systems and extension systems, getting really involved with the Met services, opening them up so the data can be used by people who can do the forecast and the crop modeling. In some countries, a policy overnight changing the way cell phone coverage happens in a country. And, like in Vietnam, setting bold targets and then putting the incentives in place. So a key need for scaling up is strong government support. And the other one, there are really significant upfront costs, and we need major investments into CSA. And these are just some of the examples from the case studies we looked at, and you can see the numbers are really significant in terms of what was put in place. Thanks very much.
You dey talk,